The Pegasus Galaxy did not welcome visitors. This was not metaphor. It was ecological fact, a predator-prey relationship scaled to the size of star systems, written in 10,000 years of culling cycles and burned settlements, and the particular silence of worlds that had once held millions. The galaxy's human populations had learned to build low, move often, and never, under any circumstances, draw attention from above. Attention from above meant hive ships. Hive ships meant the end of everything you had built, and everyone you had loved. Which made what happened at 0347 hours on a Tuesday, by Atlantis expedition reckoning, particularly catastrophic. The rift opened without warning in the outer rim of the Pegasus spiral arm, approximately 340 light-years from the nearest charted stargate. There was no seismic precursor, no subspace disturbance that Atlantis's long-range sensors would have recognized as threatening. One moment, the star field was empty. The next, something tore through the boundary between universes like a blade through silk, a wound in space that blazed with contained quantum energy before collapsing inward, leaving behind a single vessel hanging in the dark. She was sleek. That was the first thing. Built not for war's brutal geometry but for something more complicated. A ship that looked, to anyone who had grown up around gold motherships or Wraith Hive ships, almost disarmingly elegant. Her hull was white and gray, saucer-shaped forward section joined to a secondary hull by a graceful neck, twin warp nacelles swept back like wings at rest. Registry markings on her bow read NCC 74656. Her name, stenciled in clean Federation type, was USS Voyager. Inside, every alarm on the bridge was screaming. All stop. Captain Catherine Janeway gripped the armrests of her command chair as the view screen resolved from the chaos of transit to a star field she did not recognize. Her voice was precisely what it always was under crisis. Level, clipped, radiating the specific authority of someone who had already survived the Delta Quadrant and had consequently recalibrated her definition of impossible. Tuvok damage report. Hull integrity at 93%. The Vulcan's hands moved across his console without hurry. Deflector array is strained but functional. Warp core is stable. We have lost approximately 14% of our navigational database in the transit. The quantum compression appears to have corrupted several astrocartography files. Location? Harry Kim's console lit as he ran the query. A pause followed. The kind of pause that, on a ship with Voyager's history, meant the answer was going to require sitting down. Captain, I'm not reading any Federation navigational beacons. No pulsars matching our stellar cartography index. The background radiation signature of this region is, it doesn't match the Milky Way. Janeway absorbed this without visible distress, which was, in itself, a form of heroism. Different galaxy. Yes, ma'am. Best estimate based on galactic structure and stellar density. We're in a spiral galaxy approximately 2.5 million light-years from home. Maybe more. 7 of 9 looked up from her alcove station with the expression she wore when data was interesting enough to override her customary indifference. Captain? Long-range sensors are detecting a structure on the ocean surface of a planet approximately 6 light-hours from our position. The energy signature is ancient in origin, not ancient as in old. Ancient as in Alteran. The race that built the stargates. The bridge went quiet in a different way. Janeway stood, moving to the view screen as if proximity to the image would clarify it. The structure 7 had flagged was enormous. A city, or something that had once been a city, its towers reaching from the surface of a dark ocean like fingers extended toward the sky. Even at this sensor resolution it radiated age and intention, the architecture of a species that had understood the universe at a level human science was still mapping the edges of. Atlantis, Chakotay said quietly, from her left. He had read the same mission briefings she had, during the classified orientation the SGC had provided before the slipstream test. The lost city. It was theoretical, the SGC wasn't certain it existed. It exists. 7 confirmed. And it is occupied. I am detecting human life signs, Federation-incompatible technology, and what appear to be automated defense systems that are currently tracking us. Belanda's voice came from engineering over the comm. Captain, I need to tell you something about the slipstream drive before you make any decisions. The quantum manifold that pulled us through, it's gone. Not damaged. Gone, as in there's nothing left to repair. Whatever boundary we crossed, we burned the bridge doing it. Janeway turned from the view screen. In 30 seconds she had processed stranded in an unknown galaxy, ancient city confirmed ahead, weapons locked probable, and no way home yet identified. She straightened her uniform jacket, the gesture so habitual it had become ritual, and returned to her chair. Open a channel to that city. And someone get me a coffee. If we're going to be here a while, I'd like to start as I mean to go on. If you've ever wondered what happens when two completely different visions of humanity's future collide in the worst possible galaxy, you're in the right place. Subscribe and drop your crossover ideas in the comments. What character, what universe? Indeed, let's find out together. The channel opened. And somewhere in the outer dark of the Pegasus spiral arm, 300 light-years away in a region of space that Atlantis' sensors did not routinely sweep, something ancient and hungry stirred in its long sleep, drawn toward a frequency of energy it had never tasted before, and was already beginning to want. The call came through on a frequency Atlantis had never encountered before, clean, modulated, carrying none of the subspace distortion that characterized Wraith communications or the crystalline resonance of ancient systems. It was simply a voice, unhurried and precise, speaking English with an accent that placed her somewhere in the northeastern United States, probably decades into a future that hadn't happened yet. This is Captain Catherine Janeway of the Federation starship Voyager. We are not hostile. We are, frankly, lost. And we would very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss that with whoever is currently pointing weapons at us. In Atlantis' control room, Lieutenant Colonel John Shepard stared at the comm speaker with the expression he reserved for situations that defied his considerable experience with the bizarre. He had fought Wraith. He had negotiated with Genii. He had once spent 48 hours trapped in a time loop with Rodney McKay, which remained, in his private ranking, the worst experience of his life. A Federation starship from a parallel universe nonetheless managed to crack his composure. She sounds annoyed, he said. She sounds like she's been through worse than us. Dr. Elizabeth Weir was already at the primary console, pulling every sensor reading Atlantis could generate on the vessel hanging in their outer approach corridor. The ship was extraordinary, elegant in a way that felt almost philosophical, as though whoever designed her had believed that the act of exploration deserved beautiful tools. Rodney, what are we looking at? Dr. Rodney McKay's fingers had not stopped moving since the contact alarm triggered. His expression had cycled through disbelief, excitement, and the particular brand of territorial anxiety he experienced whenever confronted with technology that might be smarter than his own. Intrepid-class starship. Antimatter-powered warp drive. Deflector shields operating on a graviton field matrix that is, I want to be clear, theoretically impossible given our current understanding of field dynamics. Weapons are phasers and photon torpedoes. I've never seen targeting sensors this precise. She could hit a specific room in this city if she wanted to. He paused. She hasn't. Which is either restraint or tactical patience, and I genuinely cannot tell which. Raise shields to 30%. Weir said. Non-threatening posture. And open a return channel. Shepard leaned toward the comm with the relaxed authority he had spent years making look effortless. Voyager, this is Lieutenant Colonel John Shepard, Atlantis Expedition. We read you. Welcome to the Pegasus Galaxy, Captain, though I have to warn you, the welcome wagon here is a lot less friendly than wherever you came from. The response was immediate. Colonel Shepard. I appreciate the candor. We have a great deal to discuss, and I suspect neither of us has the luxury of a slow introduction. Request permission to send a shuttle to your location. I'd like to meet face to face. Weir and Shepard exchanged a look across the console, the compressed negotiation of two people who had learned to communicate entire arguments in a glance. "We're nodded once." "Permission granted," Shepard said. "Though I'll be honest. We're going to need to talk about how you got here before we talk about anything else." The shuttle, Voyager called it a Type 9, settled onto Atlantis's gate room floor 40 minutes later with a precision that made the expedition's puddle jumper pilots quietly envious. Janeway came down the ramp with Chukotay at her shoulder and Tuvok 2 steps behind, and the first thing Shepard noticed was that all three of them moved the way soldiers moved when they were pretending not to be soldiers, controlled, aware of every exit, cataloging threat vectors while maintaining the appearance of casual diplomacy. He decided immediately that he liked her. The briefing that followed lasted 3 hours and left everyone in the room feeling slightly unnerved. Janeway explained the slipstream experiment, the quantum rift, the burned bridge of their return mechanism, with a precision that suggested she had already run every grief she was going to allow herself about the situation and had filed it neatly away for later. McKay interrupted 17 times. Were interrupted twice, both times with questions so incisive that Janeway paused to look at her with something resembling respect. "You have no way home," Weir said, when the technical summary concluded. "Not currently." "Not currently," Janeway agreed. "My chief engineer and ops officer are already working the problem. B'Elanna Torres is the finest engineer I have encountered in 2 galaxies, and Harry Kim has navigated us through worse odds than this. But we will need time, resources, and ideally a stable base of operations. What you'll need," McKay said, pulling up the galactic map on the briefing room display, "is to understand what you've landed in. Because that energy signature your warp drive put out when you came through the rift." He highlighted a band of space in the outer Pegasus arm, 300 light-years from their position. "Our long-range sensors picked up something responding to it about 40 minutes after your arrival. In a region of space that has been quiet since before our expedition arrived. The Wraiths sleep in Hive ships when their food supply is insufficient to sustain them. They wake when something changes. Loud arrivals constitute a change." The room absorbed the implications of this in silence. "How many ships?" Tuvok asked. "We don't know yet," Shepard said. "Which is the part that concerns me most." Janeway's expression did not shift, but something behind her eyes recalibrated, the look of a commander absorbing a new parameter and integrating it into every plan she had already begun forming. She folded her hands on the briefing table and looked at Weir directly. "Then I suggest we move quickly," she said. "Whatever we've woken up, I'd rather understand it before it understands us." Outside the briefing room windows, the Pegasus sun was setting over the ocean. The city's towers caught the last light and held it, ancient and indifferent, as somewhere in the dark between stars, hibernating minds began, slowly and with great hunger, to open. The Wraith did not wake all at once. That was the detail that McKay kept returning to over the following 36 hours, running sensor sweeps with the focused anxiety of a man who understood exactly how bad the news was and could not stop calculating how much worse it might become. A full hive awakening, the kind triggered by a ZPM surge or a major military engagement, happened fast, like a switch thrown. What his sensors were showing him now was different. Slower. More deliberate. As though something had caught an unfamiliar scent and was taking its time deciding whether to follow it. "It's the warp signature," he told Shepard, standing at the primary sensor console at 2 in the morning with cold coffee at his elbow, and the particular energy of someone who had given up on sleep as a concept. "Voyager's antimatter reaction produces a subspace resonance that falls outside every frequency band the Wraith have ever encountered. Their hibernation triggers are calibrated to specific energy types, ZPM output, Naquata generators, conventional Pegasus technology. They've spent 10,000 years learning to sleep through all of that. This," he gestured at the sensor readout, "this is something they have never experienced before. And the Wraith relationship to novel energy sources is essentially the same as their relationship to novel food sources. Investigatory. Hungry." Shepard studied the display. 3 distinct thermal signatures, deep in the outer dark, each one representing a hive ship in the slow process of cycling its biological systems from hibernation to full operation. How long before they're fully awake? At current rate? 72 hours. Maybe 90 if we're lucky. And then they come looking. And then they come looking, McKay confirmed. For whatever made that sound. Janeway received the briefing in Atlantis's conference room with 7 of 9 beside her, and the doctor's mobile emitter clipped to her jacket. She had brought her chief medical officer on the grounds that a new galaxy almost certainly meant new biology, and that forewarned was forearmed. The doctor spent the first 10 minutes of the Wraith tactical overview looking increasingly appalled, which for a holographic physician with access to the medical databases of the entire Federation was a meaningful reaction. They feed on the life force of living beings, he said, when the briefing paused. Literally. Through their hands. Through specialized feeding organs in their palms, yes. We're confirmed. And the victim's age. Decades and seconds in severe cases. The doctor looked at Janeway with the expression of a man revising his threat assessments in real time. Captain? I want to formally register that I find this galaxy extremely unpleasant. Noted, Doctor. Janeway turned back to the map. 7. Your assessment. 7 of 9 had been studying the Wraith tactical data since Atlantis had shared it. Hours of mission reports, sensor logs, and after-action analyses from 2 years of expedition operations. She processed information at a rate that still, even after years, occasionally unsettled her colleagues, and she had arrived at conclusions with characteristic efficiency. The Wraith are a eusocial species organized around hive structures with a centralized queen intelligence governing each vessel. Their organic technology is adaptive. It learns from repeated engagement with the same tactical patterns and modifies hull composition and shield frequencies accordingly. This is significant. Conventional Starfleet engagement doctrine relies on pattern repetition and frequency cycling. Against the Wraith, that approach will fail within 3 to 4 engagements, as their hulls adapt. Meaning our phasers become progressively less effective the more we fire them, Chakotay said. Correct. However, the adaptation is frequency-specific. Novel energy signatures, such as Voyager's photon torpedoes, which operate on a warhead yield principle rather than a directed energy principle, will not be subject to the same adaptation curve. Additionally, the Wraith have no frame of reference for Federation tactical doctrine, which provides a temporary advantage that will erode as they gather intelligence. Shepard leaned back in his chair. So we have maybe 2 or 3 engagements before they figure us out. Approximately. Yes. Great. He looked at Taylor, who had been quiet throughout, listening with the attentiveness of someone for whom the Wraith were not a tactical problem but a lifelong terror. Taylor. Thoughts? Taylor Emgon looked across the table at Janeway with dark, careful eyes. She had grown up on Athos, beneath the shadow of culling beams, and she carried the Wraith in her blood in ways that were more literal than metaphor. The Wraith that are waking are old, she said. The Outer Rim hives are the ones that went into hibernation earliest. They have been sleeping for 3 centuries. They wake slowly because they have been dormant so long. But old Wraith are not weak Wraith. She paused. They are patient Wraith. And patient Wraith are the kind that plan before they strike. The conference room was quiet for a moment. Then we plan first, Janeway said. She stood, moving to the galactic map display, and traced a finger along the region of space where McKay's sensors had flagged the waking hives. I have no intention of sitting in this city waiting for something to come to us. We need intelligence, direct sensor readings at close range, not long-range extrapolation. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with before it finishes waking up. That means sending a team into the Outer Rim, Shepard said. He did not sound opposed to this. He sounded, in the way of someone who had spent 2 years in the Pegasus Galaxy, like a man who had simply accepted that all the options were dangerous and was selecting the least dangerous from the available menu. Voyager? Voyager, Janeway confirmed. With a puddle jumper escort so we have gate access if extraction becomes necessary. I'll take us in quiet. Full sensor dampening, minimal power output. We get close enough to read those hive ships, and we get out before they finish waking. She looked around the table at faces that ranged from cautious to skeptical to the specific expression McKay wore when he was simultaneously terrified and excited. Questions? There were many questions. She answered them all. And 72 hours later, she would look back at this briefing and understand that the plan had been perfectly sound, and that the Pegasus Galaxy had not cared even slightly. The planet M7G677 was not on the reconnaissance route. It appeared on Voyager's sensors as an incidental detail during the approach to the Outer Rim, a Class M world sitting at the edge of the mapped Stargate network, flagged in Atlantis' database as a low-priority settlement with a pre-industrial human population of approximately 300. The settlement had an electromagnetic field generator. An ancient device, left centuries ago, that the Wraith sensors could not penetrate, rendering the population effectively invisible to culling. They had survived this way for generations, living inside their invisible bubble, farming and raising children and carefully not existing to anything that flew above them. Voyager's warp sensors, operating on principles the ancient device had never been designed to account for, punched straight through the electromagnetic field and mapped the settlement in precise detail. Interesting, Harry Kim said, flagging the reading on his console. Don't, Tuvok said, not looking up from tactical. I wasn't going to. You were considering recommending a contact stop. I was considering recommending a contact stop, Kim admitted. Janeway, from the command chair, was already looking at the sensor data. 300 people. Intact agricultural infrastructure. A clean water supply fed by an underground river. Children, her sensors told her with the dispassion of physics, 73 of them, ages ranging from infant to adolescent, all registered as healthy. She looked at Chukute. Taylor told us this settlement has been hidden for 4 generations, he said quietly. Untouched by culling. The electromagnetic generator is the only reason they're alive. And Voyager's sensors just map them, Janeway said. Our sensor sweep didn't penetrate in a way the Wraith could track, Harry said quickly. We weren't broadcasting. We were receiving. There's no transmission signature the Wraith could. Check that, Janeway said. Before we move another light minute, I want a full analysis of every frequency we emitted during that scan. The analysis took 11 minutes. At the end of it, Harry Kim delivered the result with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news to a person who would not shoot the messenger but whose disappointment was somehow worse. Our lateral sensor array emits a low-frequency graviton pulse during active scanning. Passive scans don't trigger it, but we ran an active sweep to get through the EM field. The pulse is narrow-band and low-powered. Under normal circumstances, completely undetectable. He paused. But the 3 hive ships in the Outer Rim are in the process of waking up, and their sensory systems are cycling to full sensitivity. At the moment we ran the scan, 2 of them were at 60% sensory capacity. Did they detect the pulse? Another pause. I don't know. I can't determine that from here. Shepard's voice came from the puddle jumper running escort 300 kilometers off Voyager's port side. I'm going to go ahead and vote for stopping at the settlement anyway. If there's a chance the scan drew attention, they need to know. They need to be able to evacuate. We're on the same channel, was quieter. John. If we make contact with that settlement, we break 4 generations of isolation. We give them the knowledge that Voyager exists, that Atlantis exists, that there's a larger war being fought around them. We change their world whether we want to or not. We may have already changed it, Janeway said. That's the problem. She made the call in the silence that followed. Not quickly, not without weight, but with the decisiveness of someone who understood that the cost of hesitation in a situation like this was paid by 300 people who had no voice in the conversation. We stop. We make contact. We warn them. Whatever we disrupted, we owe them that much. Shepard, land the jumper first, establish trust with whoever their leadership is. Taylor speaks their cultural language better than any of us. Copy that, Shepard said. The away team assembled quickly: Shepard, Taylor, Ronan, Janeway, Chukotay, and Tuvok. McKay argued his way aboard on the grounds that someone needed to assess the ancient generator. Janeway noted the argument was self-serving and let him come anyway because he was right. The settlement was called Reem by its inhabitants, a single word that meant, in their dialect of the ancient root language Taylor translated fluently, simply safe place. Its people were quiet and careful in the way of populations that had spent generations practicing quiet and carefulness as survival skills. Their leader was a woman named Petra, 60s, silver-haired, with the calm bearing of someone who had never once doubted that the sky above her could kill everyone she loved. She received the away team with a measured courtesy that made Janeway, who had sat across tables from Borg queens and Hyrogen hunters, feel something she rarely felt, genuinely humbled. Petra listened to the explanation of Voyager's sensor sweep, and of the Waking Hive ships, without interrupting. When the explanation concluded, she was quiet for a long moment. "We have lived inside the generator's protection for 4 generations," she said at last. "My grandmother's grandmother activated it. We have never been culled." She looked at Janeway directly. "Has your ship broken the protection?" "I don't know," Janeway said. She did not soften it. "I believe the risk is low. I am not willing to tell you the risk is 0. Petra was quiet again. Then, from the edge of the village, a sound that every person on the away team recognized before their minds had time to process it: the high harmonic shriek of dart engines, descending through atmosphere. Not one dart. 6. Taylor turned to Janeway with an expression that was not accusation but was in the vicinity of it. "They weren't tracking the generator," she said. "They were tracking us." The darts came in low and fast, culling beams already active, sweeping the settlement's eastern edge in a curtain of pale blue-white light. Janeway had her comm badge open before the first scream reached her ears. "Janeway to Voyager. Red alert. Lock phasers on those darts and fire at will. Shepard. Get Petra's people to the tree line. Move." What followed was 4 minutes and 23 seconds of controlled chaos that Janeway would subsequently describe in her log as first contact with Pegasus operational reality. Voyager's phasers dropped 3 darts in the first pass. Ronan's particle magnum took a 4th. The remaining 2 broke off and climbed for orbit, their culling beams having taken 11 people before the response could stop them. 11. Gone in seconds. Aged to nothing by a beam of pale light that felt, to the survivors watching, like the hand of something that had decided their lives were food. Janeway stood in the eastern field of the settlement of Reem, in the silence that followed the Dart Engine's departure, and looked at the places where 11 people had stood moments before. The grass where they had been was undisturbed. The Wraith left nothing to grieve over. Petra stood beside her. Either of them spoke for a long time. 4 generations, Petra finally said. Janeway had no answer for that. She had broken a safe place by existing near it, and the Pegasus Galaxy had collected its toll with the impersonal efficiency of a universe that did not grade intentions. She would remember this field for the rest of her life. The Queen did not send a dart. She sent a man. He arrived through the Stargate on the planet's surface. The world Atlantis' database designated P3X119, a gray, windswept world whose Stargate sat on a coastal plain surrounded by the ruins of a civilization the Wraith had culled to silence approximately 600 years ago. The man who stepped through the gate was human in appearance, middle-aged, dark-haired, wearing the layered practical clothing of a Pegasus trader. He carried no visible weapon. His hands were visible at his sides, open, in the universal gesture of claimed harmlessness that every species across every galaxy had independently invented. Ronan had a gun pointed at him before he was 3 steps from the gate. "That's fair," the man said. He had a mild voice and the eyes of someone who had been somewhere very dark and had not entirely come back. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to deliver a message." His name, he told them when Ronan had been persuaded to lower the weapon to chest height rather than head height, was Aldrin. He was what the Pegasus Galaxy called a runner, or rather, had been, before a queen had caught him 8 months ago and offered him an alternative to being hunted. Not as a host. Not as a slave. As an emissary. A translator between species, which was an arrangement the Wraith used occasionally when they wanted something that required communication rather than simply taking. Shepard sat across from him in the puddle jumper's rear compartment with Teyla beside him and Janeway, who had insisted on being present, occupying the seat nearest the hatch with her arms crossed and her expression carefully neutral. Outside, through the jumper's viewport, the windswept plain of P3X-119 was visible in the gray afternoon light. "She knows about Voyager," Aldrin said. "She knew about it before the Ream attack. The darts that hit Ream weren't hunting you, they were testing you. She wanted to see how you responded to culling before she made contact. She killed 11 people to run a behavioral test," Janeway said. Her voice was level in the way of a woman controlling something that would otherwise be visible on her face. "Yes. And she expects us to negotiate with her. She expects you to understand that she is in a position of considerable power and is choosing to use something other than that power to approach you. In the Wraith calculus, that constitutes a significant gesture of good faith." He registered their expressions and added, without particular defensiveness, "I'm not endorsing the calculus. I'm translating it." Teyla leaned forward. "Which queen is she?" Aldrin looked at her. "She has no name that translates into your language. Her hive designation is, in approximation, the Deep Winter Hive. She is the oldest of the queens woken by your arrival. She has been in hibernation for 312 years. Why does she want to communicate?" Shepard asked. "The Wraith don't negotiate. They feed. They feed on what they understand," Aldrin said. "She does not understand Voyager. The ship's energy signature, its construction, its crew, none of it maps to any category of prey she has encountered in 10,000 years. And the Deep Winter Queen is old enough to remember that the last time the Wraith encountered something they didn't understand and chose to feed on it rather than study it." He paused. "That was the Ancients. The Wraith won that war, but they lost 8,000 years of progress losing it. She is not interested in repeating the mistake." A silence settled over the jumper's interior. 7 of 9, who had been listening from the co-pilot's seat without speaking, turned to face the compartment. "She is proposing an information exchange. She is proposing a conversation," Aldrin said. "What the conversation leads to depends on both sides." Janeway unfolded her arms. She looked at Shepard, who was looking at her with the expression he wore when he was calculating the probability that a thing was a trap and had arrived at extremely high but was waiting to hear the argument for proceeding anyway. "What are her terms?" Janeway asked. "She will meet one representative from each ship, Atlantis and Voyager, at a location of her choosing. Unarmed. No puddle jumpers, no backup within gate range. She will come alone, by which she means without her feeding retinue. She will speak for 2 hours by your measurement, and then leave. No culling during the meeting, no culling of either ship's crew within 48 hours of the meeting." "After the 48 hours?" Shepard said. Aldrin's expression suggested that the answer was obvious and that he regretted having to say it. "She makes no promises about after." Teyla's voice was quiet and carefully measured. "She is asking us to trust a Wraith Queen's word. She is asking you to decide," Aldrin said, "whether you want to understand what woke up when you arrived, or whether you'd prefer to find out the hard way." Janeway looked at the gray plane outside the viewport for a long moment. The wind was moving through the ruins of the culled civilization, bending the grass that had grown up through the broken stone, indifferent to the tragedy encoded in every collapsed wall and empty foundation. She thought about Ream, about Petra's face, about 11 people who had survived 4 generations of Wraith culling and had made it exactly to the point where a Federation starship had passed too close. She thought about the Delta Quadrant, and about every enemy she had sat across a table from because the alternative was a war she might not survive. She thought about the specific discipline of treating a monster as a speaking partner without forgetting for one moment that it was a monster. "Tell her yes," Janeway said. Shepard exhaled slowly through his nose. "I was going to say that," he said. "I know," Janeway told him. "I said it first." Outside, the wind moved through the ruins without comment. In the outer dark of the Pegasus arm, the deep winter hive turned its vast and ancient attention toward the coordinates where a queen and two representatives of creatures she did not yet understand would meet and speak, and perhaps, in the cold mathematics of a species that measured value in consumed life, find something more useful than a meal. Perhaps. 7 of 9 had not slept in 31 hours. This was not unusual. Her Borg physiology required regeneration rather than conventional sleep, and her alcove aboard Voyager provided that in 90-minute cycles that kept her functioning at full cognitive capacity regardless of how long the crisis extended. What was unusual was the quality of her focus during those 31 hours. The specific narrowness of it, the way she had set aside every other analytical thread and directed the whole weight of her considerable intellect at a single problem. The Wraith Hive mind. Not its tactical implications. Not its threat parameters. Its architecture. She had spent years as a Borg drone, connected to a collective consciousness that spanned thousands of species and millions of voices, and she understood at a level that no one else on Voyager or in Atlantis could fully access what it meant to think in a network. The Borg collective was total, every mind subsumed, every individual thread dissolved into the whole, the self reduced to a processing node in a system too vast to comprehend from inside. It was, she had concluded after years of reconstructing her individuality, the most efficient possible form of cognition and the most complete possible form of death. The Wraith Hive mind was different. She had understood this intellectually from Atlantis's mission files, but it was only after 31 hours of analysis that she understood it structurally. The Wraith did not dissolve their minds into a collective. They maintained individual consciousness. The Queen's personality, the drone's subordinate awareness, the lesser commander's tactical cognition, while linking them through a biological communication network that functioned analogously to a subspace relay system. It was not absorption. It was coordination. The distinction mattered enormously. "Because it means there are seams," she told McKay, who was standing at her station in Atlantis's research bay at 6 in the morning with the expression of a man who had followed the argument for most of its length, and was now not entirely sure he liked where it had arrived. "The Borg collective has no internal boundaries. There is no point of entry that is not simultaneously a point of total exposure. To attempt to interface with the Borg is to be absorbed by them. The Wraith network has internal boundaries. Individual nodes. A vinculum, the Borg device that coordinates collective consciousness, could theoretically be adapted to interface with the Wraith network at a specific node level without triggering the Queen's awareness." McKay stared at her. "You want to tap into the Wraith Hive mind. I want to create a selective interface that allows us to monitor Wraith communications without full immersion. Intelligence intercepts. Tactical coordination data. Early warning on Hive movements." She paused. "The vinculum I am proposing to adapt is not the primary Borg unit. It is a secondary processing node from Voyager's engineering stores, one that I modified during our Delta Quadrant transit to function as a communication relay rather than a consciousness bridge. The modification reduces its power significantly but also reduces its invasiveness." "How significantly?" "It will not allow two-way communication. It will allow passive monitoring of the outer layer of the hive mind's coordination signals, the equivalent of reading radio traffic without transmitting." McKay pulled up the technical schematic she had prepared, and his expression shifted through several phases: skepticism, reluctant interest, the dawning of professional excitement that he was clearly trying to suppress because he felt he should push back more before conceding. "This frequency band here. You're proposing to piggyback on the biological carrier wave the Wraith use for long-range hive coordination. Correct. Which means if a queen actively scans that carrier wave, if she runs a diagnostic on her own network, she would potentially detect the interface. The probability is approximately 11% per scanning cycle, assuming standard queen behavior. Higher if the queen is already suspicious of external interference. 7 held his gaze. It is a risk. I am presenting it as a risk. I am also presenting it as the only mechanism we currently possess to anticipate hive movements before they are within sensor range. McKay set the schematic down and was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he had already decided but wanted to perform the deliberation properly. You need a physical anchor point for the interface. Something the carrier wave passes through that we can attach the vinculum relay to. In Pegasus, the only things the Wraith carrier wave passes through consistently are stargates, 7 said. The gate network functions as a passive relay for the carrier wave. It is how the Wraith coordinate across planetary distances without dedicated communication ships. We would attach the vinculum relay to the Atlantis gate's secondary control crystal array. It passes every carrier wave signal that transits the local gate network without amplifying or retransmitting. McKay looked at the gate, visible through the research bay window, and then back at 7. If this works, he said slowly, we would know every hive movement in the local network before they make it. Yes. And if it doesn't work, if a queen detects the interface and traces it back, she would know that Atlantis has attempted to access the hive mind. 7's voice was even. Which is why I am bringing this to you before implementing it, rather than implementing it and informing you afterward. McKay absorbed this. You could have just done it. I could have, she agreed. I chose not to. Individual judgment without collective consensus produces suboptimal outcomes. I learned that the difficult way. There was a weight behind the words that McKay, to his credit, recognized without pushing at. He had read 7's file. Everyone had. He picked up the schematic again and began annotating it with the focused efficiency of a man who had already moved from should we to how do we best. I'll need 4 hours to prep the crystal array interface, he said. You'll need to walk me through the vinculum calibration. I've never worked with Borg components before and I have no interest in accidentally connecting my brain to anything. That outcome is not possible with this configuration, 7 said. You would simply experience a mild electromagnetic headache. Somehow that is not as reassuring as you intended it to be. They worked through the morning while Atlantis woke around them, the expedition's daily rhythms of mission prep and scientific analysis, and the background hum of a city that had been sleeping for 10,000 years and was still, in certain corridors and subsystems, in the process of remembering what it was for. Torres joined them at hour 2, having been sent by Janeway to provide engineering support, and the three of them formed a working dynamic that was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. A Klingon-human hybrid engineer, a former Borg drone, and the most arguably brilliant human scientist in 2 galaxies, each of them fluent in a different technical language, each of them finding, with minimal friction, the translation layer between those languages that allowed them to build something none of them could have built alone. At hour 4, McKay leaned back from the crystal array interface and ran the diagnostic sequence. The vinculum relay. A component no larger than a hardback novel, matte gray and faintly warm to the touch, registered active on 7's tricorder. The carrier wave passed through the gate. The interface logged it. On 7's screen, the outermost layer of the Wraith Hive Mind's coordination signal resolved into readable data for the first time in the history of either universe. McKay looked at the data stream for a long moment. Oh, he said quietly. The word carried the specific weight of a man who had just seen something that rearranged his understanding of the scale of the problem. Oh, that's not 3 hive ships. 7 had already run the count. No, she said. It is not. The carrier wave was coordinating 7. 3 in the outer rim that their sensors had already identified. 4 more, deeper in Pegasus space, responding to the same signal, the unfamiliar frequency of a warp drive from another universe, with the slow, deliberate interest of something that had been dormant for centuries and had just been given a reason to wake. Torres looked at the display. "We need to tell Janeway." "We need to tell everyone," McKay said. And for once, there was no qualifier after it, no obviously or of course or any of the verbal habits he deployed to remind people that he was the smartest person in the room. Just a plain statement, delivered with the weight of a man who had spent 2 years in the Pegasus Galaxy, and knew exactly what 7 Hive ships meant for the people living in them. 7 was already opening the comm channel. The meeting room in Atlantis had hosted a great many difficult conversations. We had sat in this room and argued for negotiation when the military wanted to strike, had argued for restraint when grief demanded action, had brokered agreements between people who had every historical reason to hate each other because the alternative was outcomes that were worse than the discomfort of sitting across a table from an enemy. She was good at this. It was, in some ways, the defining skill of her professional life, the ability to hold a space open for conversation past the point where everyone else had decided that conversation was finished. She had not previously attempted to hold that space between a Starfleet captain and a military officer who disagreed about whether to use it at all. 7 Hive ships, Shepard said. He was standing rather than sitting, which was how she knew the conversation was going to be difficult. Shepard sat when he was willing to negotiate and stood when he had already decided. 7. We had 3, now we have 7. And we don't know if those 4 deeper Hive ships have been awake for a week or a day because the vinculum interface only gives us coordination signals, not timestamps. And your proposal is to still go to the meeting. My proposal, Janeway said. She was sitting, which were noted with something adjacent to hope. Is that the meeting is now more important, not less. We have 7 Hive ships moving toward this region of space. The Deep Winter Queen called for a conversation before those 4 additional ships appeared on our intelligence. Which means she reached out while she still had a numerical advantage significant enough that conversation was optional for her. That is worth something. It's worth something if she's acting in good faith, Shepard said. It's worth nothing if she knew about the other 4 and was buying time for them to get into position. Both of those interpretations are possible. Janeway agreed. I've spent my career in situations where both interpretations were possible. You gather what data you can and you make a call. And your call is to walk into a meeting with a Wraith Queen based on 48 hours of knowing what a Wraith Queen is. The room's temperature dropped a degree. We recognized the particular quality of Janeway's silence. Not offended, not defensive, but recalibrating, in the way of someone deciding how directly to say the thing that needed saying. Colonel, Janeway said, I have sat across a table from the Borg. I have negotiated with species that considered our entire civilization a food source. I have made first contact under conditions that made this situation look routine. I am not walking into that meeting naively. I am walking into it because the alternative, 7 Hive ships that we have given no diplomatic off-ramp, leads to an outcome I am not willing to accept without first exhausting every other option. She paused. I would very much like your input on how to structure the meeting to maximize our tactical safety. I am not asking your permission to attend it. The silence that followed was the kind that contained a great deal of communication. We're stepped in before it curdled into something harder to repair. What we need to determine right now is not whether to attend the meeting but how to structure our response to the additional Hive ships while the meeting occurs. John, if we can get you to agree that the diplomatic track and the defensive track are not mutually exclusive, we can run both simultaneously. Shepard looked at her. Then at Janeway. Then at the galactic map where 7 thermal signatures burned in the outer dark. Fine, he said, and sat down, the gesture carrying its full weight. Defensive track. What do we have? The answer was, by any objective measure, inadequate. Atlantis' shield could hold against a sustained Hive assault for several hours, depending on ZPM charge level. Voyager's shields and weapons were effective but operating in a universe where every engagement taught the Wraiths something new about Federation tactical patterns. They had the vinculum interface giving them advance warning on Hive movements. McKay estimated perhaps 6 hours of warning before any attack, assuming the Queens were coordinating openly through the hive mind rather than using localized communication that the interface couldn't intercept. 6 hours is something, Torres said. She had been in the meetings since the briefing began, and she had the focused expression of an engineer who had spent the interval since the vinculum discovery calculating options. If we use that 6 hours correctly, I've been running numbers on a combined power solution, Voyager's warp core feeding into Atlantis's shield grid through an aquata to antimatter conversion relay. Our warp core output at maximum sustainable yield would increase Atlantis's shield capacity by approximately 40%. McKay looked at her with an expression that mixed professional respect with the reflexive competitive anxiety he felt whenever someone solved a problem he hadn't solved first. The conversion relay would need to be custom built. We don't have a template for antimatter to aquata power integration. I know, Torres said. That's why I need you. She said it simply, without flattery, in the tone of an engineer identifying a resource. McKay, who was immune to flattery but not to direct professional acknowledgement, straightened slightly in his chair. How long to build it? 18 hours if we work together. Maybe 14 if Voyager's doctor can interface with Atlantis's construction systems directly. His mobile emitter lets him work continuously without fatigue breaks. 14 hours, Weir said. She looked at Shepard. The meeting is in 9. Then we start the relay construction before the meeting ends, Janeway said. The doctor can begin initial component fabrication while I'm at the table with the Queen. By the time I return, we're 5 hours into a 14-hour build. She looked around the room. Defensive track and diplomatic track. Simultaneously. Both fully resourced. Shepard was quiet for a moment. Outside the meeting room windows, the Pegasus sun was moving toward midday, and the ocean reflected it in long, shifting panels of light. He had learned, 2 years into this expedition, that the situations that felt most like a choice between options were usually situations where you were going to end up doing both options anyway, and the only real question was how much time you wasted arguing about it first. Ronan's going with you to the meeting, he said. Non-negotiably. I was going to request Tuvok, Janeway said. But I'll take both. Tuvok's Vulcan. Ronan's Ronan. Shepard said it as though it explained everything, and in the context of Pegasus Galaxy survival mathematics, it essentially did. You want someone who's been running from the Wraith for 7 years in the room when a Queen decides to stop pretending to be diplomatic. Janeway considered this. Fair point, she said. Both. The planet the Deep Winter Queen had chosen for the meeting was called, in the local Pegasus dialect, Vethera, a word that translated approximately as the place between tides. It was accurate. The world was a coastal planet of dramatic geography, black rock shorelines dropping into a cold, dark sea, tidal fluctuations severe enough that the ruins along the coast alternated between exposed and submerged on a 6-hour cycle. The Stargate sat on a promontory above the tide line, surrounded by ancient stonework that the sea had been slowly dismantling for millennia. It was, Janeway thought, stepping through the gate into the salt-heavy wind, an extremely deliberate choice of location. A place that was always in the process of being reclaimed, that made permanence feel provisional and power feel temporary. She was not certain whether the Deep Winter Queen had chosen it for the symbolism or simply because it was remote, defensible, and beyond Atlantis's sensor range. Both, probably. Old things tended to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Tuvok materialized beside her with his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of absolute Vulcan composure that meant he was monitoring 8 things at once. Ronan stepped through last, hand on his particle magnum in the technically not drawn position he favored when he was expecting violence, but was committed to deferring it for the time being. The Queen was already there. She stood at the promontory's edge with her back to the gate, looking out at the dark sea, and she was not what Janeway had assembled in her mind from Atlantis's mission files. The files described the Wraith accurately. Pale skin, dark feeding marks on the palm, the unsettling beauty that evolved as predator camouflage in a species that sometimes needed to approach prey without triggering flight response. The files were accurate in their specifics, and somehow inadequate to the reality. The Deep Winter Queen was old in a way that registered physically, not as decay but as density, the quality of something that had been in existence for so long that it had accreted weight simply by persisting. She turned when they approached. Her eyes were gold, which Janeway had been told to expect, and she held Janeway's gaze for a long, assessing moment before she spoke. "You are smaller than I expected," the Queen said. Her voice was a layered thing. A primary tone with resonant harmonics beneath it, like a chord rather than a note, the biological signature of a species whose communication had evolved to carry emotional data alongside linguistic content. "The ship that made the sound that woke me. I expected something proportionate. The ship is considerably larger than I am," Janeway said. "I'm the part that makes decisions." Something moved in the Queen's expression, not quite amusement, but its evolutionary ancestor. "Then you are the correct part to speak to." She turned her gaze briefly to Ronan, then to Tuvok, with the evaluative interest of something assessing whether prey constituted a threat. "Your Saturn is afraid of me," she said. "He hides it well. Your Vulcan feels nothing, which I find more unsettling than the fear." "Tuvok has that effect," Janeway said. They sat. Or rather, the Queen moved to where several flat boulders formed a natural arrangement above the tide line, and Janeway followed, and the conversation they had for the next hour and 40 minutes was unlike any first contact she had conducted in her career, which itself said something significant. The Queen did not pretend that she did not want to feed on them. She stated it as plainly as one might state a meteorological fact. The Voyager crew, all 150 of them, represented a feeding resource. This was simply true, in the way that thermodynamics was true, and she offered it without apology because she had been alive long enough to find apology for one's nature not merely dishonest but philosophically incoherent. What she was prepared to discuss was whether feeding on them was the optimal use of their existence. "The signal your ship produced," she said. "The frequency that woke my hive. It is unlike anything in the 10,000 years of experience I carry. Nothing in the galaxy produces energy in that particular configuration." She paused. "Except one thing, which I encountered once, 4,000 years ago. A brief contact. Your kind calls them ancients. My kind calls them the first prey, the ones who fought us before they ran to their ascension plane and left the humans to us as consolation." Janeway absorbed this carefully. "You're saying Voyager's warp signature resembles ancient technology." "Not resembles. Harmonizes with. As if built from the same understanding of the universe's underlying structure, arrived at independently." The Queen's gold eyes were steady and entirely without warmth. "Which raises a question I find more interesting than how many of your crew I can feed on before your ship destroys my hive." "What question?" "Where did you come from?" the Queen said. "And what else are you capable of?" The wind moved off the dark sea and across the promontory, carrying cold salt and the sound of water against rock. Janeway held the Queen's gaze and thought about the briefing room on Voyager, 7 years ago, when Admiral Paris had told her she was being sent to the Badlands on what was supposed to be a short mission. She thought about the caretaker. About the Ocampa. About the specific moment when she had understood that the shortest distance between 2 points was rarely the journey that mattered. She thought about M7G677, and Petra, and 11 names she did not yet know but intended to learn. "Before I answer that," Janeway said, "I want something from you." The Queen was quiet, which was not agreement but was the specific silence of something that was listening. "The 4 hive ships that woke after the initial 3. They're moving toward inhabited worlds." She had confirmed this from the vinculum data before stepping through the gate. "Call them back." "Not permanently. I'm not asking you to abandon your feeding grounds." I'm asking for a pause. 72 hours. Time for this conversation to develop into something more useful than a battle either of us needs to fight. The Queen studied her for a long moment with the gold eyes and the layered voice and the 10,000 years of accumulated patience. You are asking me to defer feeding. For an abstraction. I'm asking you to recognize that 72 hours of information is worth more than 1 day of feeding. Janeway said. You've already made that calculation. That's why you sent Aldrin instead of darts. The harmonics in the Queen's voice shifted in a way that Janeway's translator could not fully parse, something that sat between acknowledgement and appetite. 72 hours, the Queen said, in exchange for an honest account of your origin and capabilities. And one other thing. Name it. The device your crew is building, the Queen said. The one that gives you access to my network's outer coordination layer. She watched Janeway's expression with the focused attention of something that had survived 10 millennia by reading prey accurately. Dismantle it. You may keep the intelligence you have already gathered. But the interface ends. Tuvok's voice was very quiet at Janeway's shoulder. She's known since the first hour. Since before the meeting was arranged. The Queen corrected, without looking at him. The signal your device emitted when it first interfaced with the gate carrier wave was subtle. But I have been reading this network for 3,000 years. She returned her gaze to Janeway. The interface ends. In exchange, I will tell you something the device could never have told you, what the 7 hives waking in Pegasus space will do next, and which of them are mine to command and which are not. Janeway made her decision in the space of a breath. Agreed, she said. The interface will be dismantled within the hour. She opened her comm badge before the Queen could respond to it. Janeway to McKay. A pause. Then, with the tone of a man who already suspected what was coming. Please tell me you're not about to ask me to take apart something I spent 14 hours building. 7 hours, Janeway corrected. And yes. Immediately, please. The silence on the other end of the channel was eloquent. You know, McKay said, I had a perfectly good morning before I met you. The Queen's intelligence was precise in the way of something that had no reason to lie. Of the 7 hive ships now active in Pegasus space, 3 were under the Deep Winter Queen's direct authority, her own hive and 2 subordinate vessels whose commanders answered to her through the hive mind hierarchy. These 3, she confirmed, were holding position in the outer rim pending the 72-hour window she had agreed to. They would not move against inhabited worlds during that period. The remaining 4 were not hers. They belonged to a queen the Deep Winter Queen referred to, with a particular resonance in her harmonics that Janeway's translator rendered as something between contempt and legitimate fear, as the Storm Ascendant, a queen who had woken independently, drawn by the same warp signature, and who operated outside the Elder Queen's authority. The Storm Ascendant was younger by Wraith reckoning. Only 600 years in hibernation compared to the Deep Winter Queen's 3 centuries older sleep, and she had spent the centuries before her last hibernation building a reputation for what the Wraith considered tactical aggression and what the Pegasus human populations called massacres. She is not interested in conversation, the Deep Winter Queen had told Janeway, in the last minutes of their meeting on Vethera's promontory. She is interested in the ship. Specifically, she wants to understand how to replicate the warp drive's energy signature. She believes it could function as a hibernation trigger, allowing her to wake specific hives without drawing Atlantis' attention to the awakening signal. She will come for Voyager. Not for its crew. For its engineering. When? Janeway had asked. She was already moving when we began speaking, the Queen said. She will be within strike range of Atlantis in 19 of your hours. The number 19 had a particular weight in the briefing room when Janeway delivered it. 19 hours for hive ships, a queen whose tactical history included the depopulation of 11 inhabited worlds in a single decade. Shepard pulled up the star chart and ran the intercept geometry with the focused speed of someone for whom this kind of calculation had become reflexive. They'll come out of FTL here, he said, marking the point. Approximately 400,000 kilometers from Atlantis. That's inside the range where our shield can't benefit from the extended response time. They'll be at attack distance before we've fully recalibrated from the jump signature. Not if we move to meet them, Janeway said. The room looked at her. Voyager can go to warp. We meet them at their FTL exit point before they've fully decelerated. That's a window of approximately 4 minutes during which a Hive ship is at reduced shield capacity, and its weapons are cycling up from jump configuration. 4 minutes is a significant tactical window if we use it correctly. Against one Hive ship, maybe, Shepard said. Against 4, we'd be at weapons range of all of them simultaneously. We don't engage all 4 simultaneously. We engage the lead Hive, the Storm Ascendant's command vessel. The other 3 are subordinate. If we can force the command Hive to defensive posture in those 4 minutes, the subordinates default to their queen's tactical direction. A queen on defense doesn't commit subordinates to offensive action, it leaves her flank exposed. She looked at Tuvok. Confirmed? Consistent with the behavioral data in Atlantis's mission files. Tuvok confirmed. Wraith tactical doctrine prioritizes queen survival above all other objectives. A queen under direct attack will recall subordinates to defensive formation. So we hit the command Hive hard enough in that 4-minute window to force defensive posture, Chakotay said. Then we have 3 Hive ships in escort formation around the queen who isn't attacking. That's still 3 Hive ships. That's 3 Hive ships that Atlantis can engage at even numbers while Voyager holds the command vessel's attention, Janeway said. Shepard, what does Atlantis have if we neutralize the lead Hive as a tactical variable? Shepard looked at McKay. McKay looked at Torres. The power relay they had been building, the warp core feed into Atlantis's shield grid, was 7 hours from completion. Without it, Atlantis's shield at current CPM levels could sustain engagement against 3 Hive ships for approximately 90 minutes before degradation became critical. With it, the math changed substantially. We need 7 more hours on the relay, Torres said. We have 19. That gives us 12 hours of margin. Build it, Janeway said. All available personnel. I want that relay completed and tested before they exit FTL. She turned to Shepard. I want Voyager positioned at the exit point with full weapons hot and every trick in our tactical database loaded and ready. 7. What do we have that they haven't adapted to yet? 7 had been preparing this assessment since the morning's briefing. Photon torpedoes remain fully effective. The Wraith have no adaptation baseline for warhead-yield weapons. Voyager's secondary phaser arrays, operating on rotating frequency modulation, will remain partially effective through approximately 6 exchanges before adaptation degrades output below combat threshold. I have prepared a frequency rotation algorithm that extends that window to 9 exchanges by randomizing the modulation pattern beyond predictable cycling. She paused. Additionally, I have identified a structural vulnerability in Wraith Hive ship organic hull plating. The plating regenerates damage through a biological process that requires approximately 4 minutes to close breaches larger than 40 meters in diameter. A sustained photon torpedo spread targeting the same hull location within that 4-minute window would create compounding damage faster than the hull can regenerate. You're describing a sustained volley at a fixed point, Chakotay said. Yes. It requires holding position relative to the Hive during the exchange. We cannot be maneuvering evasively if we want the spread to maintain target consistency. It is tactically aggressive. It is tactically aggressive. Janeway agreed. She looked at Tom Paris, who was already at the con with the expression of a pilot who had been waiting for permission to do something that frightened him. Mr. Paris, can you hold us in sustained firing position relative to a Hive ship that is trying to kill us for 4 minutes? Tom Paris had flown through Borg transwarp conduits, navigated a quantum slipstream with a degraded field matrix, and once piloted Voyager through a planet's atmosphere. He looked at his captain with the expression of a man who considered the question only slightly rhetorical. Captain, he said, I can do 4 minutes. The 19 hours that followed were the most concentrated productive effort Voyager and Atlantis had jointly accomplished. Torres and McKay completing the power relay in 11 hours rather than 7 through the combined force of professional competition and genuine necessity. 7 running tactical simulations with Shepard's team until the approach geometry was mapped to every contingency they could model. Taylor and Ronan coordinating with Athosian contacts to move the nearest settlements below the engagement zone's sensor horizon. The doctor ran medical prep in Voyager's sickbay, converting every available space to emergency triage capacity and preparing for wound types that Federation medicine had never previously treated. He did this with characteristic efficiency and the running commentary of someone who processed professional anxiety through narration. "I want it noted for the medical record," he told Kess. No, not Kess, she was long gone, he corrected himself, told Ensign Wildman, who was assisting him, that I trained for 29 medical specialties across 600 planetary cultures, and absolutely none of them covered wraith-feeding injuries. I am improvising, and I find that philosophically disagreeable. At hour 16, Janeway stood on Voyager's bridge in the dark, the ship running at minimal lighting to preserve power for the engagement systems, and looked at the starfield ahead. The exit point was marked on the tactical display, a coordinate in empty space that would, in 3 hours, become the most consequential location in the Pegasus Galaxy for anyone on either ship. She thought about the deep Winter Queen, holding her hives back as agreed, watching from the outer rim with 10,000 years of patience and gold eyes that missed nothing. She wondered, not for the first time, whether the Queen's cooperation was strategic or something more complicated, whether a being that old could develop something that functioned like genuine curiosity, and whether curiosity could function, in even the smallest way, like a conscience. Then the FDL alarm sounded, 3 hours early, and every thought that was not tactical vanished instantly. "They jumped ahead of schedule," Harry Kim said, his voice carrying the specific quality of someone reporting the confirmation of a fear they had hoped was unfounded. "All 4 Hive ships, exiting FTL now." "Captain, they're not at the projected exit point. They came out 12,000 kilometers closer." 12,000 kilometers. The 4-minute window collapsed to 90 seconds. "Red alert," Janeway said. Her voice was completely steady. "All hands, battle stations. Mr. Paris, get us there. Everything we have." "Aye, Captain." Voyager leaped forward into the dark, and the Pegasus Galaxy, indifferent as always to the hopes of smaller things, arranged itself for catastrophe. The first 90 seconds were the worst. Paris pushed Voyager to full impulse the moment the Hive ships resolved on sensors, burning the distance to the command vessel at a closing speed that the Wraith had no tactical frame of reference for. Nothing in the Pegasus Galaxy maneuvered at impulse velocities, and the Storm Ascendant's targeting systems spent 40 of those 90 seconds recalibrating to track something moving that fast. 40 seconds was enough. 7's photon torpedo spread hit the command hive's forward hull section in a pattern calculated from Atlantis's entire mission database of hive ship engagements, not where the Wraith had been hit before, but where they had never been hit. The junction zones between major hull sections where the organic plating was thinnest because regeneration biology prioritized surface coverage over junction depth. 3 torpedoes in rapid succession, same coordinates, compounding the damage before the hull could begin closing. The breach opened to 60 meters. Then 80. Then, on the 4th impact, past 100. "Sustained volley," Janeway ordered. "Hold position, Mr. Paris." What followed was the 4 minutes that Tom Paris would describe in his personal log as the most precise flying I have ever done while being actively shot at by something the size of a city. The Storm Ascendant's weapons found Voyager on the second pass, culling beams that Voyager's shields deflected with effort, the biological targeting frequency pushing against shield harmonics that were not designed to resist it. The shields held. They held at 80%, then 68%, then, on the third weapons exchange, 51%. "Shield emitters on the port array are overloading," Torres reported from engineering, her voice carrying the compressed urgency of someone managing catastrophic failure in real time. I can redistribute from the secondary grid, but we'll lose maneuverability on the port quarter. Do it, Janeway said. Tuvok, shift the torpedo spread to the secondary hull junction. 7. Update the targeting. Updating, 7 said. And then, 3 seconds later, with the tone of someone reporting something unexpected and significant. Captain? The power relay. The warp core feed into Atlantis' shield grid. Torres and McKay's 11-hour construction. Activated at that moment as Atlantis entered the engagement, its shield grid blazing to 140% standard capacity. Photon energy from Voyager's antimatter reactions folded through Naquadah conversion matrices and directed into shield harmonics that the 3 subordinate Hive ships had never encountered. The subordinates adjusted their attack vector toward Atlantis, and Atlantis's reinforced shields absorbed the engagement with 11% more margin than any previous Wraith assault had allowed. The Storm Ascendant, her forward hull compromised past the point where regeneration could keep pace with incoming damage, did what the Deep Winter Queen's intelligence had predicted. She pulled her subordinates into defensive formation, and the offensive coordination of 4 Hive ships became the defensive scramble of a Queen protecting her survival. The window opened. Shepard, Janeway said on the command channel. Now. From Atlantis, a drone salvo. The weapons the city had been built to fire, the weapons the ancients had designed for exactly this kind of engagement, streaking out through Pegasus space in a pattern that Shepard directed from the command chair with the ancient gene and the intuitive targeting system that responded to thought more than input. The drones found the subordinate hives at their most exposed moment, shields oriented toward command vessel protection, weapons cycling, tactical attention divided. 2 of the 3 subordinate hives broke off and fled to FTL within minutes, their commanders making the survival calculation that the engagement had become untenable. The 3rd held, and Voyager and Atlantis concentrated every available weapon on it for 90 seconds until it too turned and ran, trailing biological matter from 3 major hull breaches. The Storm Ascendant's command hive was alone. It was also dying. Not quickly, but with the slow inevitability of a biological system whose regeneration capacity had been outpaced by cumulative damage. Janeway looked at the tactical display and saw a vessel that could no longer maneuver effectively, whose weapons were cycling at 30% output, whose queen was contained in a ship she could not escape without exposing herself to Voyager's targeting systems. She can't jump to FTL, Harry said. The drive system, whatever the organic equivalent is compromised. She's trapped. The bridge was quiet except for the sound of systems working and the distant hum of shields still processing residual weapons discharge. Janeway looked at the crippled Hive ship on the view screen for a long moment. Then she opened a channel. Storm Ascendant, she said. This is Captain Janeway. Your subordinates have withdrawn. Your ship is critically damaged. I am not going to finish this engagement. Not today, not against a vessel that can no longer defend itself. That is not how I conduct warfare. She paused. I am also not going to let you leave without an understanding between us. You came here for my ship's technology. I want you to understand clearly, completely, that there is no version of this galaxy where that technology becomes yours. Not through force. Not through negotiation. Not through whatever you were planning. Go home. Regenerate. Make a different calculation about what this encounter means. A silence stretched across the channel that lasted long enough that Janeway wondered if the Queen's communication systems were too damaged to respond. Then, in the layered harmonic voice that all Queens shared and each made distinctly their own, the Storm Ascendant spoke. She said 3 words in the Wraith language, which Taylor, on the Atlantis channel, listening, translated quietly. Remembered. Not finished. The channel closed. And then the Storm Ascendant's hive did something that Seven's tactical analysis had rated at less than 4% probability. It rerouted every ounce of remaining biological energy from weapons, shields, and non-essential systems into its FTL drive and jumped. Barely. Raggedly. leaving a smear of biological residue across local space that Atlantis's sensors tracked for 11 minutes before it dispersed. But gone. Shepard's voice came over the command channel with the dry precision of a man who had learned to process relief as understatement. "Well," he said. "That worked." "It worked," Janeway agreed. "You know she meant it. The remembered, not finished thing." "I know." Janeway leaned back in her command chair, feeling the particular exhaustion that settled in after adrenaline had finished its work. Around her, the bridge crew was running damage assessments, repair prioritizations, medical call-ins, the organized aftermath of people who had survived something difficult and were already converting the experience into the next thing to be managed. "She'll be back. Maybe not this Queen, maybe not this decade. But we've changed something in the Pegasus balance that doesn't change back." She paused. "Make sure Atlantis has everything we've gathered on the Storm Ascendant's tactical patterns before we leave. McKay has the vinculum data from before we dismantled the interface. That intelligence belongs here." "Already transmitting," Harry said. And then, from Chukotay, quietly, "B'Elanna wants to talk to you about the slipstream problem." Janeway turned. "Progress?" "She says she has something. She won't say more until she's run the numbers twice." He had the expression of someone carefully not projecting hope onto information that hadn't been confirmed yet. "But she's running the numbers a second time." Janeway stood, straightening her uniform jacket in a gesture that had, over 7 years, become as much ritual as habit. Outside Voyager's view screen, the Pegasus Galaxy spread in all its ancient, dangerous, heartbreaking beauty. The same stars under which humans had been hunted for 10,000 years, under which 11 people in a field on M7G677 had simply ceased to exist, under which a Wraith Queen had looked at a Starfleet captain and found something worth studying rather than feeding on. She thought about Petra. She thought about the deep Winter Queen's gold eyes and 10,000 years of patience. She thought about the particular weight of being the thing that had rung a bell that could not be unrung. The warp signature that had woken 7 Hive ships and permanently altered a war that had been running since before Earth had invented the wheel. She could not undo that. She could not return the 11 people to the field. She could not make Voyager's arrival gentle or quiet or consequence-free. What she could do was ensure that the people who came after her, Shepard's team, Weir's expedition, the humans of the Pegasus Galaxy who had survived 10 millennia of culling, were better equipped for what was coming than they had been before Voyager tore through a dimensional boundary and materialized in their sky. It was not redemption. It was not enough. It was what remained, and it would have to be sufficient. She went to find B'Elanna. Atlantis's mission database recorded the Voyager incident in a file flagged for Joint SGC Starfleet classification, a designation that posed certain bureaucratic complications given that, in the Pegasus Galaxy's version of reality, Starfleet technically did not exist. The file noted, 1 Federation Intrepid-class vessel, crew of approximately 150, arrived via dimensional quantum event. Duration of stay, 11 days. Tactical contribution, significant. Direct engagement with Storm Ascendant Hive Fleet, forced withdrawal of 4 hostile Hive ships. Establishment of power relay technology increasing Atlantis shield capacity by 40%. First documented diplomatic contact with Deep Winter Hive, yielding actionable intelligence on regional Hive ship activity. The file also noted, in Dr. Weir's personal addendum, Captain Janeway did not apologize for arriving. She apologized for the consequences of arriving. A distinction that seemed important to her, and that I found, on reflection, important to me as well. There is a version of exploration that believes good intentions exempt you from impact. She did not believe that. She believed you were accountable for both. Voyager left Pegasus space 14 days after arrival, B'Elanna Torres having reconstructed a partial slipstream manifold from salvaged components and Asgard-derived quantum field mathematics provided by Atlantis's ancient database. The jump was imprecise. Where exactly it delivered them remained, for a time, uncertain. But Janeway had navigated uncertainty before. Somewhere in the outer dark of Pegasus, the deep Winter Queen watched them go with gold eyes and 10,000 years of memory, and filed the encounter in whatever architecture an ancient mind uses to store things it intends to consider at length. Indeed. The stars remember everything. Indeed. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching.